For a long time, video games were a medium defined by their limitations. In the early days, meaning wasn't something you found in the code, it was something you brought to it. You weren't playing for a story, you were playing for a high score. The narrative was external, tucked away in instruction manuals or left to the player's imagination, while the mechanics did all the heavy lifting. But as technology evolved, so did our ambitions. The 90s marked a massive shift where games started to borrow the language of cinema to find their voices. We saw the arrival of the director's vision, where cutscenes, voice acting and virtual cameras were used to prove that games could just be as emotional and complex as any blockbuster film. However, the real evolution wasn't just in the graphics, it was in the innovation. We finally started moving away from being passive observers of a fixed script. We began to see the rise of a true player agency, where the world just didn't exist for us to walk through, but actually started to react to the choices we made and the paths we took. My dissertation, From Mechanics to Meaning, explores this exact journey. It's a look at how games stopped trying to be movies and finally found a storytelling language of their own, one built on discovery, consequence and a world that speaks for itself. During the 70s and 80s, game narratives and gameplay was entirely separate due to technology limits. In the era of Pong and Space Invaders, there was no clear narrative present, and users had to use their imagination to create one. When the 90s hit, the PlayStation arrived, which fundamentally changed the industry, introducing brand new hardware and the use of games being on a CD-ROM. This allowed developers to create 3D games instead of traditional 2D games which people were used to for so long. Developers such as Konami and Square utilised this to expand their narrative minds. Released by Square in 1997, Final Fantasy VII follows a mercenary who joins an eco-rebellion group to fight against a massive corporation in a bid to save the planet. It was a landmark title that shifted the medium away from a simple good versus evil plot towards a complex cinematic drama. By exploring themes of corporate greed, environmental collapse, and psychological trauma, it proves that games can deliver the same emotional weight as traditional media. The game broke established rules by featuring a fractured protagonist Cloud and famously killing off a mega duragonist mid-game. Technically it was revolutionary for its time, utilising 3D pre-rendered cutscenes and multiple choice dialogue affecting the protagonist.
What have you got there? A cardboard box? Yeah, remember that trick? That's the snake I remember. Those poor fools won't know what hit them.
Released in 1998 by Konami, Metal Gear Solid became a landmark title in the gaming industry. Players take on the role of Solid Snake, a highly skilled soldier sent to a remote Alaskan base after a rogue special forces unit known as Foxhound seizes control of a nuclear weapons facility. As Snake infiltrates the base, he must rely on stealth, strategy and careful planning to avoid detection while uncovering the group's true intentions. The game was directed by Hideo Kojima, who aimed to create an experience that felt more like a film than a traditional video game. To achieve this, the game featured fully voiced dialogue, cinematic camera angles, and complex characters, which was highly innovative at the time. These elements helped immerse players in the story and set a new standard for narrative-driven games. Despite all those cinematic layers, these games were what Jesper Jules calls progression games. This means the story was always fixed. You was essentially an actor following a director's script. You can play through the scenes, but you cannot change the ending. Jules argues that these games could be as emotional as movies, but at the cost of the player agency. You weren't the author of the story, you were just the one moving it forward. To see how far we jump from the 90s, let's take a look at another game. Baldur's Gate 3. Developed by Larian Studios in 2023, this was an RPG based on the rules of Dungeons & Dragons. With an early game, you're caught between a refugee tiefling camp called the Grove and a camp full of goblins, where you must side with one of them. In a progression game, you will likely be forced to side with the Grove and be the hero, but in this game, the choice is yours, and the consequences can be brutal. This is what Janet Murray calls an agency, the power to take meaningful action and see how the world reacts to it. However, siding with the goblins and raiding the grove doesn't just give you a different cutscene, it fundamentally breaks your story. Multiple companions will leave your party forever, you lose quests and traders within the grove, but in exchange you unlock an entirely new companion called Minthara that gives you a completely different storyline and relationship that hero players will never see, causing a permanent narrative divergence. This is the difference. Siding with the goblins isn't a game over or a wrong choice. It's a valid dark path that the game fully supports. This is what Murray meant by agency. The game doesn't judge you, it reacts to you. You aren't just watching the story of a hero or a villain, you are actively deciding which one you are. Finally, meaning isn't always something found in big choices. Sometimes it's hidden in silence. This is environmental storytelling.
It's that war. War never changes.
In Fallout 4, developers used mise-en-scene, the arrangement of objects in a space to tell a story without a line of dialogue. Let's take the story of Sharon. If you head to the Vault Tech HQ, located in Beacon Hill, and explore around, you will come across a terminal which belonged to a person called Frank Davison. If you select the log that says the 13th of October, it states a person called Sharon accidentally spilled coffee on his new shirt while in the lounge. Although he made it sound like it wasn't a big deal, telling her it was fine, and laughed about it, in reality he wanted to stab her with a pen if she ever did it again. If you head down to the basement, you will come across another terminal which belonged to Walter Scott. He states on the 19th of October he was worried about Sharon, due to the absence and lack of contact, as his highlight of the day was seeing her during lunch. While exploring the basement, you come across a skeleton behind a set of crates, wearing a lab coat with a pen next to it. This ultimately suggests Sharon's demise, and that Frank Davison ultimately killed her. There is no quest markers or cutscene here, but finding the corpse and reading the logs, you uncover a story that isn't handed to you, but something you have discovered, proving that in modern day gaming, the environment itself can act as the narrator, piecing a story from events that occurred over 200 years ago. Modern day gaming has moved far beyond from the fixed scripts of the 90s, whether through the massive agency of Baldur's Gate 3 or the environmental storytelling of Fallout 4. We are no longer just spectators, we are co-authors. By reshaping the world or uncovering its quiet mysteries, the player becomes the final, essential piece of the narrative puzzle. Today, the most powerful stories aren't just told to us, they are experienced by us.